Clayton, New Mexico, April 26, 1901. The trapdoor opened under Thomas Ketchum, and the rope took his head clean off. The body fell one direction, the head another. Photographers were already set up. The movies gave you the clean drop and the cut to black. The frontier gave you something else entirely. And the punishment Hollywood tried hardest to bury may not be the one you expect. Of everything the frontier actually did to the men it caught, which truth did the legend work hardest to erase? We are not going to the movies for any of this. We are going to the court dockets that survive, the prison logs, the military dispatches, the coroner's ink, and the newspapers that printed the morning after. In 1870, a single judge in West Texas might cover a territory the size of South Carolina. In Montana, before statehood, entire counties had no sheriff at all. A deputy earned $50 to $75 a month. A pine coffin cost about $8. The nearest federal court could be a week's ride over open ground. That was the world these punishments lived inside. Where the record is clear, I will tell you. Where it cracks, I will tell you that too. Number 25. The Police Court Fine. In Dodge City, Kansas, between 1878 and 1879, the most common sentence handed down in police court was not a noose, not a cell, not a single lash. It was a fine of $1 to $5 for drunk and disorderly conduct. Hundreds of cases, same outcome. A man stood before the police judge, heard his number, paid the clerk, and walked back out into Front Street before the dust settled. $5 in 1878 had the buying power of roughly $160 today. It stung, but it was over in minutes, and the man was free to walk back into the same saloon that got him arrested and order another glass. No movie ever built a scene around a cowboy reaching into his vest, counting out coins on a clerk's desk, and walking home sober in the morning light. There is no drama in a receipt, no poster, no legend. But that receipt was the most common face of frontier justice that most people ever saw. Not the rope, not the badge, not the showdown. The fine. Number 24. Banishment. In Deadwood, Dakota Territory, in 1876 and 1877, town committees gave undesirables a sunset deadline. Leave by dark or face what comes next. No trial, no cell, no written record in any court file. It was the cheapest sentence a town could hand down because it cost nothing and left nothing on paper. But consider what it actually meant. A man cast out on foot in a Dakota winter with no horse and no provisions, crossing open ground where the temperature dropped past 30 below, and the nearest settlement was 2 days of walking through snow that reached the hip. He could die in the hills before sunrise, and no one would answer for it. No search party, no inquest. The town simply went quiet, swept the step, and carried on as if the man had never stood on its street. Banishment looked merciful on the surface. Below the surface, it could be a death sentence handed down without an executioner, carried out without a witness, and buried without a grave. Number 23. The calaboose. Not the clean barred jail cell from every Western you have seen. At Fort Griffin, Texas, the lockup was a shed. In other towns, it was a dugout, a pit with a plank nailed over the top, or an old buffalo hide shack with a chain bolted to the floor. No ventilation in summer, no heat in winter, no privy, lice in every seam of every blanket. Men held for weeks in spaces built for storing salt pork and saddle tack, breathing air so thick with human sweat and waste that a candle would barely hold its flame. The walls ran slick in summer. In winter, frost formed on the inside of the door, and men slept in a pile, like dogs to keep from freezing. Today, the average American jail cell is about 70 square feet, with plumbing, a light, and a bunk. On the frontier, some calabooses were half that size, shared by 3 men and whatever crawled in through the cracks in the planking. The word calaboose comes from the Spanish calabozo, meaning dungeon. The frontier used the word honestly. Number 22. Public shaming. In the California gold camps of the early 1850s, miners who stole from a claim were stripped to the waist, a sign hung around the neck reading "Thief" in black paint, and paraded through the center of camp while men banged tin pans and shouted from the doorways of their tents. Dozens of diaries from the mother lode describe the ritual in careful detail. Some describe the man weeping. Some describe him silent, staring straight ahead as the procession moved past the long toms and the sluice boxes and the cook fires. The punishment was designed not to wound the body, but to destroy a man's name in a place where reputation was the only credit anyone carried. No bank would stake a known thief. No partner would share a claim. No merchant would sell on trust. You were finished, completely and permanently, without a single mark on your skin. The sign came off at the end of the parade. The name it carried stuck for good. Number 21. The wooden horse. At military posts across the frontier, including Fort Laramie, the Army punished its own with a device the regulations never quite admitted existed. A sharp-edged beam of timber set on tall legs like a sawhorse, sometimes 8 feet off the ground. The soldier was forced to sit astride it, the narrow edge digging into his weight, with muskets or iron weights tied to each ankle pulling him down. Hours in that position. The Army's own inspection reports from the 1860s describe the injuries in clinical language that makes the stomach turn. Sleeping on guard duty, drunkenness, insubordination, minor charges, every one of them. The wooden horse did not care what the offense was. It answered them all with the same slow pressure, the same splintered edge, and the same sound from the man on top that carried across the parade ground. Number 20. Ear cropping and facial mutilation. In Missouri and Arkansas in the 1830s and 1840s, courts could legally sentence a man to have an ear slit or cropped as part of a criminal conviction. The cut was made in public, often by the sheriff himself, with a witness list recorded in the court file, and the blade cleaned on the same rag used to wipe the bench. The mark was permanent. It followed a man into every town he entered for the rest of his life. No hat pulled low enough could hide it at a barber's chair, across a card table, or in the pew of a Sunday church. Every handshake was a question. Every stranger's glance went to the ear first. You carried your conviction on your body where everyone could read it before you opened your mouth. Today, we seal juvenile records and debate the right to be forgotten online. On the frontier, the right to be forgotten did not exist. Your body was the court file, and the file never closed. Number 19. Branding. The letter D for deserter burned into a soldier's cheek or hip with a heated iron. The letter T for thief pressed into the skin in certain mining camps while the accused was held down by 3 or 4 men. Done in front of witnesses, often the full regiment or the whole camp standing in a circle. The smell is in the accounts. More than one witness wrote that the sound the man made stayed with them longer than anything else they heard on the frontier. Military court-martial records from the 1850s and 60s document the practice in clinical detail, including how long the iron was to be held and how large the letter was to be. The scar healed rough, white, and unmistakable. It needed no courthouse to read. It spoke for itself every time a man turned his face to the light. Number 18. The ball and chain. At the Texas State Penitentiary at Huntsville and in territorial prisons across the West, a literal iron ball weighing 20 to 30 pounds was riveted to an ankle chain. Not a metaphor. A physical weight that a man dragged behind him every step he took. Men worked in them, breaking rock in the quarry with the ball sitting in the dust beside their feet. Slept in them, the iron pressing against the shin bone until the skin wore through. Photographs survive from Huntsville and other facilities. The men stare out from those images with the flat expression of people who have stopped counting anything. When the iron finally came off, the scars stayed for life. The weight was gone, but the ankle remembered. The body always remembered. We are not halfway through this list, and the rope has not appeared once. Hold on to that. Number 17, bucking and gagging. This was the United States Army's answer to a soldier who talked back, drank too much, or fell asleep on watch. The man sat on the ground with his knees drawn tight to his chest. His wrists were tied together and looped over a stick shoved under his knees, locking him in a crouch he could not straighten from. Then a stick or the flat of a bayonet was lashed across his open mouth as a gag. Hours in that position. Circulation cut off at the wrists, the knees swollen past bending. Jaw forced open against the gag until the muscles tore. Court-martial records from the 1860s through the 1880s describe soldiers carried away afterward, but unable to walk, unable to close their mouths, unable to hold a cup of water. The practice was officially banned more than once, and it officially continued each time. Number 16, staking out. Arms and legs staked to the ground with iron pins driven into the hardpan, face to the sky, the body spread flat on the bare earth and left there for hours in the open air. At Army posts in Texas and the desert Southwest, this was a standard field punishment for offenses that did not merit a court-martial, but merited something a man would not forget. In summer heat that cracked 110 degrees, staking could kill. At minimum, it left a man sun-blinded and delirious, his lips split to the meat and his skin blistered black across the face and chest and the tops of his bare feet. Vigilante groups used the same method on civilians they wanted to break without leaving a corpse. The movies never showed the flies settling thick on a man who could not lift a hand to brush them away. They never showed the begging for water that no one brought. Some men were staked out over anthills. That detail sits in the record, written plainly and without apology by the men who stood there and watched it happen. Number 15, the whipping post. Legal flogging at various territorial prisons across the frontier. A set number of lashes delivered with a leather strap or a braided rawhide whip, the prisoner stripped to the waist and tied standing upright to a wooden post in the center of the yard, often in full view of every other inmate. The guards could line up to watch. Prison superintendent records document the counts in columns as neat as a merchant's ledger. 50 lashes for attempted escape, 20 for disobedience, 10 for talking back to a guard. The wounds went septic in the desert heat within a day, the torn skin crusting over with sand and flies before the man reached his cell. Infection killed where the leather did not. Some men stood through all 50 and walked back to their bunks under their own power, leaving a bloody handprint on the doorframe. Some collapsed at 10 and were dragged back by the arms, their heels drawing 2 lines in the dirt. Today, corporal punishment is banned in every American prison. On the frontier, it was Tuesday. Number 14, the dark cell. Yuma Territorial Prison carved a punishment cage into the Caliche hillside behind the main cell block. No windows, no lamp. A stone box cut into the Arizona rock, black as the inside of a closed fist. Prisoners held in total darkness for days, sometimes weeks. No sense of time, no sense of direction. Superintendent records and later testimony from surviving prisoners describe what shared the space with them. Rattlesnakes that had denned in the cracks, scorpions that came out after dark, which inside the dark cell meant always. The men who served time there called it the snake den. A man went in standing upright and came out not sure which direction the sun rose. Some came out unable to remember their own names. The dark cell was not a punishment for what a man had done, it was a remaking of what a man was. Number 13. Tarring and feathering. Not the slapstick comedy version. Pine tar heated in a kettle to near boiling, poured or brushed onto bare skin while the man was held down. Then the feathers pressed into the tar while it cooled and bonded to the flesh. The removal took the skin with it. Vigilance committees in San Francisco used this in the early 1850s. So did border partisans in Kansas and Missouri during the bleeding years before the Civil War. Newspaper correspondents who witnessed the practice described the screaming as something that emptied the street behind them. Some men died from the infection that followed in the weeks after. The ones who lived carried the scars into old age, patches of skin that never grew hair again. Every time a movie plays this for a laugh, it insults the men who went through it. The record does not laugh. The record describes the smell of burning flesh. Notice what has been missing from this entire list. No showdown at noon, no sheriff squaring off in the street, no quick draw settling a score in the dust. That was the movie. This is the record. Number 12, the Miners' Court. At Bannock and Virginia City in Montana Territory, 1863 and 64, a theft or a claim dispute could bring a trial within the hour. No lawyers, no written code, no appeals court within 1,000 miles, no record of proceedings beyond whatever a man scratched into his diary that night. A crowd gathered in the open air around the accused, standing in the dirt with his hat in his hands, and a show of raised fists decided whether he lived or walked or swung. Sentence carried out on the spot, flogging for some, banishment for others. The rope for the rest, depending on the mood of the camp that morning and how much whiskey had been poured the night before. One diary from the Bannock diggings describes a man tried, convicted, and hanged before noon, the rope thrown over the crossbeam of a barn that still had no roof. The body turned slowly in the mountain air while the crowd broke apart and went back to their claims. Justice, such as it was, moved faster than the body cooled. Number 11. Punishing women on the frontier. The cattle towns and mining camps did not spare women, but they punished them differently, and the difference tells you more about the frontier than any hanging ever did. Court records from Dodge City and Tombstone show women convicted of theft, vagrancy, or charges connected to prostitution, subjected to public humiliation designed to shame rather than wound the body. Forced head shaving is documented in several mining camps. A woman's hair cut to the scalp with sheep shears in front of a jeering crowd, then turned loose bareheaded into the main street while men lined the boardwalk and stared. No fine, no cell, just the exposure and the memory of it in every face she passed for months afterward. The double standard sat in the open for everyone to see and no one to name. A man's violence was expected and often forgiven before the blood dried. A woman's transgression was spectacle. The punishment was not the sentence the court read aloud. It was every pair of eyes in the room and every whisper that followed her through the door and down the street and into the next year of her life. Number 10. The Vigilance Committee. San Francisco, 1851, and again in 1856. This was not a mob carrying torches through the dark. It was a parallel government operating in daylight. Thousands of members, written bylaws, their own headquarters, their own jail, their own gallows built on the waterfront. The membership rolls survive in the archives with the signatures of some of the city's most prominent businessmen written in firm, unhesitant hands. The 1856 committee tried, convicted, and hanged at least 4 men, while the actual courts of San Francisco stood by and watched it happen. A man named William Tell Coleman ran the operation with the precision of a corporate board. Minutes were kept, votes tallied. When the law failed, these men did not wait for it to recover. They replaced it openly, and they signed their names to every decision they made. Number 9. Convict leasing. After the Civil War and deep into the 1890s, Texas and other western and southern states leased prisoners to private companies for railroad construction, mining, and plantation labor. The prisoners were disproportionately black men, convicted on charges so minor they barely qualified as offenses. Vagrancy, loitering, walking on the wrong road after dark in a county where every road was the wrong road. The convict lease contract was simple. The state provided the men, the company provided the work, the guards provided the shotguns. Mortality rates in some Texas convict lease camps ran higher than anything recorded in the worst territorial prisons. Men died of heat, of typhus, of collapse, of beatings that were logged as accidents in company ledgers. The state collected the fee. The company collected the labor. The men collected nothing but scars and shallow graves on ground that was never marked and never consecrated. State records document the death counts in tidy columns. Hollywood has produced thousands of westerns set in this exact era across these same landscapes. It has never made a single one about this. Number 8. The Chain Gang. County and territorial road building projects across the West. Men chained together at the ankle, 10 or 15 to a line, breaking rock and grading roadbed with picks and shovels in summer heat that softened the tar under their feet. They slept in open wagons at night or on the bare ground in a drainage ditch with the chains still locked. Distinguished from convict leasing by one critical detail. The chain gang was visible. Townspeople watched these men work through their own streets, past their own stores, under their own windows. Housewives heard the chains ringing on the hardpack from their front porches while they shelled peas. Children stopped and pointed. Guards with shotguns walked the line and said nothing. Photographic evidence survives from the 1880s and 90s. The men in those photographs are not looking at the camera. They are looking at the ground beneath their feet, because the ground is the only thing that belongs to them. The chain gang was not hidden. That was the entire point. The suffering was the advertisement. The obedience was the product. Number 7. Judge Isaac Parker's Court at Fort Smith, Arkansas. From 1875 to 1896, Parker's jurisdiction covered Indian Territory, 74,000 square miles of ground so lawless that federal marshals rode in pairs and still died at a rate that emptied the roster every few years. Parker sentenced 160 men to death. 79 were actually hanged, many of them on a gallows built to drop 12 men at once, though the most ever hanged in a single drop was 6. His court processed over 13,000 cases in 21 years. But here is what the nickname buried. Parker was not a sadist. His private letters survive in the archives at Fort Smith. He opposed the death penalty in his own words while imposing it from the bench, because he believed he was the only wall between the law and the darkness behind it. He said so in writing more than once to men he trusted. Hollywood took the phrase "hanging judge" and threw away everything underneath it. The dime novels gave you a monster in a black robe. The letters give you a man who could not sleep. We are in the top 5 now, and I still have not told you which truth Hollywood buried the deepest. You may think you know. Stay with me. Number 6. The public hanging. This is the one I need you to remember. When the frontier did hang a man, it turned the killing into a civic event. Crowds of hundreds, sometimes thousands, gathered in the town square or on the open ground outside the jail. Vendors set up stalls selling food and whiskey. Children were brought to watch and lifted onto their fathers' shoulders to see over the crowd. The condemned man was given time to speak. Sometimes 10 minutes of prayer, sometimes a curse, sometimes nothing at all but a long stare across the heads of the people who had come to watch him fall. Then the drop, the sound the trapdoor made, the jolt of the rope, the involuntary responses of the body that no movie has ever once put on screen. Newspaper correspondents described the smell. Some described turning away. Photographers set up their equipment before the drop and sold the prints afterward for $0.25 apiece. The public hanging was not hidden because hiding it would have defeated the entire purpose. In a world where real justice was almost non-existent, the spectacle was proof to the crowd that the system worked at all. Remember this one. We are coming back. Number 5. Botched hangings. Go back now to Clayton, New Mexico, and Thomas Ketchum's headless body on the ground. That was not rare. It was not even the worst of it. When the drop was too short, the neck did not break, and the man strangled at the end of the rope. Documented cases from across the territories describe men twisting and kicking for 20, 30, even 45 minutes before they finally went still. Witnesses describe the sounds. At Downeyville, California, in July of 1851, a woman known as Josefa Segovia was hanged after a minors' court trial that lasted less than an hour. She was hanged after an extrajudicial trial, making her one of the earliest recorded female lynchings in California. The science of the long drop, the calculated fall designed to break the cervical vertebrae cleanly, was not standardized until decades after the frontier era ended. Before that, every hanging was a guess. The man on the rope was the experiment. And the experiment had no voice in the method. Number 4. Lynch law by the numbers. Between 1882 and 1968, over 4,700 lynchings were documented across the United States. A significant number occurred in western states and territories. This was not rare. In certain times and places, it was routine. Entire communities participated in the open, with no masks and no shame. Photographs were taken by studio photographers who set up their cameras in advance. The prints were sold as postcards mailed through the United States Postal Service with handwritten notes on the back. Newspapers printed the dates and locations ahead of time, the way you might list a church social or a livestock auction. Men brought their families. The word lynching traces back to the Revolution, but the frontier era industrialized it, turned it into public calendar, turned it into commerce. The photographic record survives in archives you can visit today. The images in those files are the most honest thing the frontier ever produced. And they are almost impossible to look at. Number 3. The Territorial Prison. Yuma Territorial Prison opened its gates in 1876 on a bluff above the Colorado River. The Wyoming Territorial Prison, the New Mexico Territorial Penitentiary. State inspection reports survive from all of them, and they read like dispatches from a war nobody declared. Overcrowding at double and triple capacity. Tuberculosis epidemics sweeping through unventilated stone cells like wind through an open door. Summer temperatures inside reaching 120 degrees, rations measured by inspectors and found short of what the state had paid for, the difference pocketed by wardens and suppliers. Yuma held over 3,000 prisoners across its 33 years. The cemetery on the hill above the river tells part of the story. Prisoner photographs survive in the Arizona archives. Gaunt, sunburned, hollowed-out men in striped uniforms that had not been washed, staring at the camera with nothing behind their eyes. The walls at Yuma are still standing. You can walk through them today. The heat has not changed. Number 2. The punishment of Native peoples. The Long Walk of the Navajo. 1864. Over 8,000 men, women, and children forced at gunpoint to march 300 miles from their homeland to Bosque Redondo. Those who fell behind were left on the trail. Some were shot where they dropped. Army dispatches written by the officers who led the march document the numbers. Navajo oral history, passed from those who survived to their children and their children's children, confirms every mile. The reservation system that followed was confinement to land that could not support life, surrounded by soldiers with rifles and orders to shoot anyone who crossed the boundary line. Then the boarding schools. Children pulled from their mothers' arms and shipped to institutions 1,000 miles from home, punished with the strap for speaking their own languages. Captain Richard Henry Pratt stated his philosophy in his own handwriting. Kill the Indian, save the man. The letters survive, the buildings survive. Some of the children did not. Hollywood made thousands of westerns set across these same decades, painted against these same mountains and these same sunsets. It almost never showed any of this. Not once, not honestly. Number 1. And now we reach the punishment. Hollywood buried deeper than all the others on this list combined. It was not the whip, not the rope, not the brand or the dark cell or the stakes in the ground. It was the nothing, the silence, the empty space where justice should have been and never came. In most frontier counties, for most of the years those counties existed, there was no functioning court. Federal records show entire judicial districts with 0 cases prosecuted in a given year. A man could be killed in front of witnesses, the murder reported in a newspaper, and no arrest would follow. The killer rode on. The victim was buried in ground that was never marked, and the file, if there ever was a file, simply stops in the middle of a sentence, no one finished. No warrant, no trial, no punishment of any kind. Most violence on the American frontier produced silence, and nothing more. That is the truth that would collapse every Western ever made. The central myth of the genre, the engine that drives every showdown and every third act, is the promise that someone was coming. The marshal would ride in, the posse would form, the showdown would settle things in the street. It almost never did. For most of the frontier, for most of the time it existed, there was no marshal, no posse, no reckoning. There was a body in the dirt and a man on a horse growing smaller against the horizon. That was the ending. Hollywood could not sell it. So Hollywood invented a different one. Now the counting stops, and the argument begins. On one side, the version the movies built. The sheriff pins the star to his chest. The hanging restores the moral order. The frontier tames itself through courage and a fast hand. On the other side, the court records and the census rolls. Judicial districts covering 10,000 square miles with one judge riding circuit on a mule. Deputies who earned less than cowhands and quit before the year was up. Towns with no jail, no courthouse, and no law beyond the man with the most guns. The documents survive. The dime novels survive too. They do not describe the same country. The men who built the false version had names. Ned Buntline turned living lawmen into dime novel gods and sold the copies by the crate. Prentice Ingraham wrote over 600 novels set on a frontier he largely invented. Then Hollywood picked up where the pulp writers left off. The Hays Code, which governed American film from the 1930s to the 1960s, required that crime be punished on screen. Every time. No exceptions. That single rule created a version of frontier justice that never existed in any territory, in any court, in any year. The frontier had no such rule. After Hollywood came the town boosters. Chambers of commerce in Dodge City, in Tombstone, in Deadwood, who rewrote their own histories for the tourist dollar. They buried the real court dockets under gift shop mythology and walking tours. The gap between what the newspapers printed then and what the brochures sell now is wide enough to lose the truth in. So here is where I stand. The most brutal truth about frontier punishment was not any single method on this list. It was the void. But go back to number 6, the public hanging, the one I asked you to remember. When the frontier did punish, it made a spectacle precisely because real justice was so rare. The hanging was not justice, it was advertising for justice. Proof staged before a crowd with vendors and children that the system existed at all. The rarer the law, the louder the show. Today, the courtroom is a building on a map. You can drive to it and walk through a metal detector and sit down. On the frontier, the courtroom was a rumor on horseback. Somewhere in a territorial archive sits a murder reported in a paper that no longer prints and answered by no one. Not then, not now. The movies gave you the ending. The frontier never did.